Between 1908 and 1920, thousands of Japanese picture brides voyaged to America, agreeing to marry men they knew only through photographs. Under the gentleman's agreement, these women embarked on a journey fraught with uncertainty, often passing through Angel Island, only to be profoundly amazed when their new American husbands looked precisely like the images they had received. The winter winds bit at the edges of Hana's worn kimono, tugging at the loose threads and making her shiver despite the layers. Her village, nestled precariously on a steep hillside overlooking the churning sea of Japan, offered little in the way of comfort or opportunity. The rice paddies were meager, the fishing boats often returned with empty nets, and the young men, those who hadn't already left for the factories of Osaka or the distant shores of America, carried a heavy weariness in their eyes. At 20, Hana felt the weight of her unmarried status pressing down on her, a silent accusation from her parents whose shoulders were stooped from endless toil. She watched her younger sister, Fumi, already showing signs of the same quiet desperation, and a fierce protectiveness stirred within her. Something had to change. Then, the matchmaker arrived, a stout woman with a smile as wide as a carp and eyes that missed nothing. She carried a worn leather satchel, from which she produced stories as vibrant and enticing as rare silks. Tales of the golden land, America, where even the humblest laborer could find prosperity, where the streets were rumored to be paved with ambition and opportunity. She spoke of families reunited, of fortunes amassed, and most importantly, of loving husbands waiting for dutiful Japanese wives. Hana had heard whispers of picture brides, a desperate solution for desperate times, but the matchmaker spun it into an epic romance, a bridge across an ocean of despair. The air in their small, smoky home thickened with anticipation as the matchmaker meticulously selected a photograph from her satchel. It was a formal portrait, a studio shot, slightly sepia-toned, featuring a man identified as Kenji Sato. He was dressed in a Western-style suit, a crisp white shirt, and a neatly knotted tie, an outfit Hana had only seen in magazines. His face, though serious, held a gentle quality, almost a hint of a smile playing around his lips. His eyes, dark and direct, seemed to convey a quiet strength, a steadfastness. He looked kind, thoughtful, and capable. He was older than her, perhaps in his mid-30s, but his face was unlined, radiating a calm assurance. The matchmaker pointed out his strong jawline, the intelligent glint in his eyes, the subtle curve of his mouth that suggested a hidden humor. "A man of good standing," she purred, "with a prosperous farm in California. He seeks a wife of virtue and grace." Hana's breath caught. He looked perfect. Not just handsome, but solid, trustworthy. A provider. Her parents, their faces etched with the years of struggle, saw in Kenji's image not just a potential son-in-law, but an end to their endless worry for Hana. A chance for a new beginning for their family through her. He was the embodiment of the stability they craved, the prosperity they dreamed of. Hana herself felt a surge of something akin to destiny. This photograph, this man, was her ticket to a different life. A life where Fumi might not have to endure the same fate. A life where her parents could finally rest. She imagined him tending his farm, a gentle smile on his face, waiting for her. She saw herself by his side, helping him, building a life, a family. She clutched the precious photograph, its corners already softened by countless touches, and felt a quiet, resolute hope bloom within her. The decision was made, a blend of necessity and fervent, desperate hope. The village prepared a modest, tearful farewell. Her mother pressed a small, dried flower into Hana's palm, a blessing for her long journey. Her father, usually so stoic, embraced her fiercely, his voice thick with unspoken prayers. Hana, her heart a tangled knot of fear and excitement, promised to send money, to make them proud. She would embrace her new life, her new husband, the man in the photograph, and make it a success. The journey, she knew, would be long and difficult, but the image of Kenji's kind face was a beacon, a promise whispered across the vast, unknowable ocean. As the ship pulled away from the familiar shores, a solitary tear traced a path down her cheek, a mingling of sorrow for what she left behind, and anticipation for the future held within that perfectly composed photograph. The steamship was a world unto itself, a creaking, groaning beast of wood and steel, its belly crammed with humanity. The air in steerage was thick with the scent of bodies, fear, and stale food. Hannah found herself huddled with dozens of other women, all picture brides, their faces a tapestry of hope and trepidation. They shared stories in hushed tones, comparing their photographs like precious jewels. Hannah, still clinging to her fervent optimism, proudly showed Kenji's picture to a cluster of women. "He has such kind eyes," one whispered, "and so well dressed." Hannah would nod, a blush rising to her cheeks, the image of his gentle smile warming her from within. They talked of their dreams, fertile lands, bustling shops, sons to carry on the family name, and husbands who would treat them with respect and affection. Each woman, clutching her faded photograph, projected her deepest desires onto the silent, two-dimensional image. But as the days turned into weeks, and the vast, indifferent ocean stretched endlessly around them, a different kind of story began to circulate. Whispers from older women, those who had already sent siblings or friends to America, started to chip away at the polished facade of their collective dream. They spoke of husbands who were far older than their photographs suggested, their youth long since weathered by the relentless sun and back-breaking labor, of men whose smiles in pictures belied harsh words and colder hearts, of tiny, dilapidated shacks instead of grand houses, of endless toil instead of comfortable lives. One woman spoke of her cousin, who had arrived to find her husband missing an arm, an injury carefully concealed in the waist-up photograph she had received. Another, a stoic woman named Akiko, recounted how her sister's husband was nearly 20 years older than his picture, which had been taken during his own youth. A tiny, insidious seed of doubt began to sprout in Hannah's heart. She would look at Kenji's photograph, then quickly dismiss the thought. Surely her Kenji was different. His smile was too genuine, his eyes too kind. She clung to the image, a desperate prayer against the creeping fear. Finally, a faint smudge appeared on the horizon, slowly resolving into the distant silhouette of land. San Francisco, the Golden Gate, though not yet the iconic bridge it would become, was a concept, a promise of entry to the land of dreams. A collective gasp went through the crowded deck, but the awe quickly gave way to a chilling dread, as their ship was directed not to the bustling piers of the city, but to a smaller, forbidding island, Angel Island. They were herded like cattle, their hopes and dreams replaced by uncertainty and fear. The detention center was a stark, impersonal gauntlet, long, cold corridors, interrogations that felt like accusations, questions about their lives, their families, their intentions, their husbands, designed to trip them up, to find a reason for deportation. Hannah, struggling with the few English phrases she had learned, felt a profound sense of powerlessness. The beautiful promises of the matchmaker seemed to curdle in the harsh fluorescent light of the interrogation room. Her first true encounter with America was not the land of milk and honey, but a place of scrutiny, suspicion, and a chilling bureaucratic indifference. Each day felt an eternity, a test of endurance, a purgatorial limbo between the old world and the new, her dreams suspended in a terrifying uncertainty. The days crawled by, each indistinguishable from the last within the sterile confines of Angel Island. Hannah's initial hope had been slowly eroded by the constant scrutiny, the gnawing fear of rejection, and the grim stories whispered among the other detainees. She'd seen women, their faces crumpled in despair, being led away, their American dreams shattered before they'd even truly begun. Every time her name was called, her heart would leap into her throat, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Was this it? Freedom or rejection? Then, one crisp autumn morning, her name was called again, this time with a definitive tone that brooked no argument. "Tanaka, Hana!" A uniformed guard, his face impassive, gestured for her to follow. Her legs felt like lead, yet she moved, clutching her small, worn bag and, more importantly, Kenji's photograph, now softened and creased from countless anxious touches. She was led through a maze of corridors, the sounds of distant chatter and footsteps echoing eerily. Finally, she was brought to a small, sparsely furnished room. A single wooden table stood in the center, two chairs facing each other. The air was still, heavy with unspoken anticipation. Hannah sat down, her hands trembling as she smoothed the photograph on her lap. Her gaze darted to the door, her breath catching in her throat, A moment later, the door creaked open. A man stepped inside. Hana's eyes, wide and searching, instantly locked onto him. He was Japanese, dressed in simple work-worn clothes. Her gaze swept over his face, then darted down to the photograph in her hands, then back up to his face. A jolt, not of joy or relief, but of a strange, almost surreal recognition, shot through her. He stood before her, the very embodiment of the image she had carried across the ocean. Every feature, precisely as depicted in the sepia-toned portrait, was there. The strong, square jawline, the deep-set eyes that now held a hint of fatigue but still carried that quiet intensity, the dark, neatly combed hair, perhaps a shade less lustrous than in the picture, but undeniably the same. Even the subtle, almost shy curve at the corner of his lips, that hint of a smile she had found so reassuring, was present, though now it seemed strained, tinged with a weariness that the photograph had skillfully omitted. The careful angle, the meticulous lighting of the studio portrait, had perfectly captured his essence, yet subtly obscured the underlying harshness of his reality. There was no grand deception of age, no missing limbs, no outright falsehood in his physical appearance. He looked exactly like the photograph, and that was the unsettling part. The uncanny likeness was not a pleasant surprise, but an almost chillingly precise replication, hinting at a reality that was perhaps too manufactured. It was too perfect. Her relief at finding the man match his picture was instantly overshadowed by a cold, subtle unease. The man was physically identical, yet the aura, the context, the promise she had built around that image was entirely absent. He was polite, offering a curt bow, but his eyes, though kind, were distant, preoccupied. She noticed the deep lines etched around them, betraying more years and more hardship than the smooth skin of the photograph suggested. His hands, when he briefly extended one in a formal, stiff greeting, were rough, calloused, the knuckles thick and reddened, bearing the undeniable marks of relentless manual labor. The sterile room, the weary man, the functional rather than vibrant setting, it was all a stark contrast to the verdant farm and loving comfort she had envisioned. Something vital was missing, a warmth or spirit she had projected onto the photograph. The dream felt hollow, the reality stark. She forced a small, tremulous smile, a silent vow to herself that she would make this work, no matter the unsettling undercurrent that now prickled her skin. "Hana," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Kenji-san," he replied, his voice a low rumble, devoid of the gentle warmth she had imagined. He led her out of the building, past more guards, and through a series of gates. Their first journey together, beyond the confines of Angel Island, was a silent and awkward affair. A dusty, rattling truck awaited them, its engine coughing to life with a jolt. The landscape beyond the city was not the manicured gardens she had dreamt of, but vast, flat expanses of brown earth, punctuated by row upon row of low green plants. Strawberry fields, she realized with a sinking heart. The air was dry, dusty, and carried the faint, sweet scent of overripe fruit mixed with the acrid tang of exhaust. Kenji drove with a grim efficiency, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. He offered no conversation, no comforting words. Hana sat beside him, clutching the now meaningless photograph, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and dawning realization. The uncanny likeness was not a blessing, but a subtle, unsettling illusion. The man in the picture was here, in the flesh, yet the promise it held had somehow evaporated into the dusty air of this foreign land. The home Kenji led her to was a rude awakening. It was not the tidy, well-kept farmhouse of her dreams, nor even a modest but comfortable dwelling. Instead, it was a small, weather-beaten shack, leaning slightly to one side, its paint peeling like sun-scorched skin. It sat at the edge of a vast strawberry field, surrounded by other identical shacks, forming a small, isolated camp for laborers. The interior was even more stark. A single room, dimly lit by a small window, furnished with little more than a thin mattress on the floor, a rickety table and a few crates for storage. A small wood-burning stove stood in one corner, its pipe snaking up through a hole in the ceiling. The air was damp with the smell of earth and stale cooking. This was not the prosperity the matchmaker had promised. This was the brutal reality of a laborer's existence. Hannah's dreams of a gentler life dissolved like morning mist in the harsh California sun. Kenji, freed from the scrutinizing gaze of the Angel Island officials, shed the last vestiges of his posed politeness. He was a man consumed by exhaustion and a silent, simmering resentment. The kind smile from the photograph was a phantom. In its place was a grim, tight line across his lips. His shoulders were permanently slumped, his movements slow and deliberate, the hallmarks of a body pushed beyond its limits. He spoke little, his voice often gruff, clipped by weariness. His eyes, once a beacon of kindness in the photograph, now held a haunted, faraway look, as if constantly calculating debts and harvesting yields. He was older than his carefully composed portrait had implied, not dramatically so, but the years of backbreaking work in the unforgiving sun had etched deep lines into his face, weathered his youth into a premature old age. He was not the gentle, prosperous farmer of the photograph, but a tired, solitary man, broken by the very land he sought to cultivate. Hannah was immediately thrust into this grueling reality. Her first morning in America began not with a bridal meal, but with a meager breakfast and a swift march to the fields. The sun was already a brutal orb in the sky by the time she arrived, joining rows of other Japanese laborers, many of them women no older than herself, their faces already etched with the same weariness she now saw reflected in Kenji. She learned to pick strawberries, her back aching within hours, her fingers quickly stained crimson and calloused raw. The work was endless, monotonous and unforgiving. From sunrise to sunset she bent over the plants, feeling the sun scorch her neck, the dirt cake under her fingernails, and the unrelenting pressure of needing to fill basket after basket. Her hands, once soft and nimble, quickly grew as rough and calloused as Kenji's. When she wasn't in the fields, she was tending to the shack, cooking meager meals over the sputtering stove, washing clothes by hand in a basin of cold water. The physical hardship was immense, a relentless tide that threatened to drown her. The language barrier was another suffocating layer of isolation. The few English phrases she had memorized now seemed useless in the rapid-fire commands of the foreman, or the muttered conversations of the Mexican laborers. She longed for the familiar comfort of her native tongue, for the easy flow of conversation with her mother, or Fumi. The small Japanese community in the camp was a mix of resigned veterans, their spirits dulled by years of this life, and newer arrivals, their hopes not yet fully extinguished. Some women offered a nod of shared understanding, a quiet gesture of solidarity, while others regarded her with a suspicious, hardened gaze, as if her presence was a burden, another mouth to feed. Hannah felt adrift, an alien in a foreign land, grappling with a life utterly unrecognizable from her cherished dreams. At night, when the fieldwork finally ended and Kenji was asleep, his breaths heavy with exhaustion, Hannah would retrieve the photograph. The man in the picture, with his neat suit and gentle smile, seemed to mock her from the faded paper. She would trace the lines of his face, searching for clues she had missed, a hint of the grim reality that now surrounded her. How skillfully it had been composed, she realized with a bitter pang. How deliberately had the angle been chosen to obscure his true age, the background blurred to hide the desolate fields that were his world. The uncanny likeness was not a faithful representation of a life, but a calculated precision, designed to present an idealized version of a man, one that bore just enough resemblance to his true self to avoid outright accusation of fraud, yet entirely misrepresented the life he offered. Her initial amazement had curdled into a slow, dawning realization of a profound deception, not necessarily of his face, but of the entire future that face had represented. The man was there, physically, yet the truth of his existence was a brutal, heartbreaking lie. The subtle details of Kenji's life, once overlooked in her naive hope, now began to scream at Hannah. He avoided talking about his past, his family, his dreams. Any questions she cautiously posed were met with a grunt, a dismissive wave of the hand, or a sudden, abrupt change of subject. The matchmaker's letters, she recalled with a bitter taste, had been conveniently vague about his prosperous farm, never mentioning its actual size, its true yield, or the crushing debts tied to it. One evening, after another grueling day, Hannah overheard two older picture brides whispering in the communal wash area. His picture, one said, was from his graduation nearly 20 years ago. The matchmaker knew they always know. The other nodded grimly. Mine, they pasted his head onto a younger man's body. A common trick. Hana's blood ran cold. The perfect photograph of Kenji, she realized, was likely a carefully constructed illusion. Not a blatant lie, perhaps, but a subtle manipulation of the truth. The uncanny likeness was not accidental, but a deliberate precision designed to mislead. A trick of light and shadow, an artifice of hope. The matchmaker, she now understood, was not an architect of love, but a merchant of desperation, profiting from the yearning of both hopeful brides and lonely, struggling bachelors. The amazement she felt on seeing Kenji had been a carefully orchestrated illusion, a cruel bait and switch. She began to observe Kenji more closely. He was a man perpetually bowed by an invisible weight. His silence wasn't calm but heavy, laden with unspoken burdens. She noticed how he would stare at the stacks of bills, his brow furrowed, his shoulders slumping even further. The farm was failing, she realized. The strawberries barely covered the cost of labor and seed, let alone the rent on the land, or the towering debts he must have accumulated. His occasional bursts of frustration, a muttered curse under his breath, a sudden slam of a door, were not signs of inherent cruelty, but rather the desperate lashing out of a man trapped in a cage of his own making. He was as much a victim of his circumstances as she was. Hana would often steal glances at the photograph, now tucked away in a small wooden box under her straw mat. It no longer represented a dream, but a symbol of her profound disillusionment. She studied the details, seeking the cracks in the facade she had so desperately believed in. She realized the suit in the photo was likely a rented one, the backdrop a painted canvas, the subtle smile a carefully practiced pose. The man in the picture was Kenji. Yes, but not the Kenji who rose before dawn and toiled until dusk. His hands raw, his spirit crushed. He was a ghost of a man, an aspiration, a carefully crafted lie. Her internal conflict churned. Anger flared, hot and bitter at the deception, at her own naivety. Shame burned her cheeks when she thought of her family, how proudly she had spoken of her future. The thought of returning to Japan, to face the scorn and the humiliation, was unbearable. She was trapped, bound by culture, by expectation, and by a lie that was now her grim reality. The unspoken resentments between Hana and Kenji festered, thick and suffocating like the summer heat. Their marital home, if one could call the shack that, became a tomb of silence, punctuated only by the sounds of their exhausted breathing or the rustle of straw as they shifted in their sleep. Any attempt Hana made at conversation, born of a desperate need to connect, was met with Kenji's grunts or curt, unhelpful replies. The weight of their deceptive union, the lie of the photograph that hung unspoken between them, created a chasm that widened with each passing day. But Hana was not entirely alone. In the fields and at the communal pump, she found a glimmer of solace among the other picture brides. Women like Akiko, whose quiet strength resonated with Hana's growing resolve. They shared stories, not of dreams but of survival, of husbands who were drunks or old or simply indifferent. They exchanged tips on how to stretch meager rations, how to soothe aching muscles, how to deal with the demands of their landlords. They formed a quiet network of support, a sisterhood forged in shared hardship. Hana, initially timid, found her voice among them, joining in their hushed complaints and their defiant, hopeful whispers of small improvements. They might be trapped, but they were not broken. One sweltering afternoon, as Hana was carefully sorting bruised strawberries, she stumbled upon a small, leather-bound ledger hidden beneath a loose floorboard in their shack. It belonged to Kenji. With trembling hands, she opened it. The neat, precise Japanese characters detailed a horrifying truth. Loans upon loans, exorbitant interest rates, the meager income from the farm swallowed whole by repayments. His prosperous farm was not owned by him, but leased, and the debt he carried was crushing, a bottomless pit that would take a lifetime of relentless toil to repay. The entry that made her gasp was a specific amount, dated just before her arrival, marked as a bride's passage fee. The matchmaker's fee, she realized, had simply added another burden to his already impossible load. This was not just poverty, it was financial slavery. The photograph, once a symbol of her hopes, now felt like a curse. She pulled it from its hiding place, looking at Kenji's face, a face that now seemed both familiar and utterly alien. The initial amazement she had felt upon seeing him, the uncanny likeness that had initially seemed a relief, was now reinterpreted as the cruelest form of deception. He hadn't just looked like his picture, he had been his picture, an idealized illusion designed to lure her into this grim reality. She gripped the photo, her knuckles white, and felt a surge of anger, pure and untamed, at him, at the matchmaker, at the system that had brought her to this desolate place. Yet beneath the anger, a flicker of something else began to stir, a realization of Kenji's own desperation. He too was a victim, trapped by the same cultural and economic pressures that had driven her across the ocean. He had likely used his last reserves of hope, his last coin, to secure this arrangement, hoping to find a partner to share his impossible burden. Hana, though still reeling from the betrayal, felt a stubborn resolve harden within her. She was not just a naive girl who had been tricked. She was a woman who had endured a perilous journey, survived Angel Island, and was now learning to work the unforgiving land. She would not be broken. She would find a way to navigate this cruel new world, not for the man in the photograph, but for herself. She took a deep breath, folded the ledger, and placed it back under the floorboard, her mind already turning over plans. Small acts of defiance, tiny sparks of agency that would eventually ignite into a fire. The summer was brutal. A relentless heat wave scorched the fields, wilting the strawberry plants and threatening the entire harvest. Kenji, already burdened by debt and despair, grew more withdrawn, his gruffness hardening into a silent, impenetrable wall. The marital discord, once a quiet hum beneath their interactions, now vibrated with an almost tangible tension. Hana tried to talk, to ask about the ledger, to understand the true depth of their predicament, but Kenji would only grunt, his eyes fixed on the distant, shimmering horizon, as if seeking an answer that never came. Their life was a constant, grueling struggle, a battle against the elements, against poverty, and against the crushing weight of their unspoken truths. One evening, after the day's backbreaking work, Hana sat with Akiko and another bride, Chio, sharing their meager dinner. Akiko, her face etched with the wisdom of years of hardship, watched Hana's pensive expression. "The photographs," Akiko began, her voice low. "They show a dream, don't they? But dreams are fragile here. Reality is different." Chio nodded, her eyes downcast. "My husband's picture. He was a scholar. He had gentle hands. Now they are like rocks. And his spirit is gone." Hana felt a surge of identification. Her own Kenji, the man in the photograph, was a ghost, replaced by this weary, taciturn laborer. But as they talked, a quiet strength flowed between them. They discussed ways to earn a little extra money, selling wild herbs picked from the roadside, weaving small baskets in the evenings. Hana, emboldened by their shared resilience, found her voice. She began to speak of the foreman's unfair wages, of the cramped living conditions, of their collective need for better terms. It was a small, hesitant beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. The breaking point arrived with the sudden, devastating news of a crop blight, a silent, insidious enemy that swept through the strawberry fields, turning healthy plants into withered, black husks overnight. The entire harvest was ruined. Kenji came back to the shack that evening, his face ashen, his body trembling not from exhaustion, but from a profound, terrifying despair. He collapsed onto the straw mat, covering his face with his calloused hands, muttering in a voice Hana had never heard from him, a broken, defeated sound. "It's over, Hana. It's all over. We are ruined." Hana watched him, a strange calm settling over her amidst the chaos. The fear was still there, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce, protective anger. No longer would she be a silent, naive girl. She was a woman who had crossed an ocean, endured detention, and toiled in endless fields. She stood over him, her voice, though quiet, carrying a steel she hadn't known she possessed. "What is over, Kenji-san?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the thick air. "The lies, the silence, or your courage?" Kenji flinched, slowly lifting his head, his eyes red-rimmed and bloodshot. "There was no lie, Hana," he rasped, his voice raw. "Only desperation. There was nothing for me in Japan. My family, they were shamed. My debts grew. I lost the land. I had nothing, no prospects. I was alone. The matchmaker, she promised a way to start anew, a wife, a family. I used the only good picture I had from when I was younger, before the hardship etched itself onto my face. I told them I had a farm, that I was prosperous. It was a lie of hope, Hannah, not malice. He stared at her, his vulnerability laid bare. I was a desperate man. I wanted a life. I wanted a family. I wanted to believe the picture myself. In that moment, staring at the man whose carefully cultivated image had shattered her dreams, Hannah saw not the deceiver, but another soul caught in the brutal currents of circumstance. His despair mirrored her own, his loneliness a reflection of her isolation. The pristine photograph, once a symbol of her dashed hopes, now felt like a cruel irony, a testament to the powerful, seductive illusion of a better life. She still felt the sting of betrayal, the anger, the bitter taste of lost dreams. But beneath it, a grudging understanding began to surface. He was not a villain, merely a man who, like her, had been forced to gamble with his life and hers for a chance at survival. The chasm between them, built on lies and silence, remained vast, but in that shared moment of shattered dreams, a fragile bridge of raw, painful honesty began to form. They were two broken people, marooned together on a desolate shore, staring at the ruins of their illusions. The silence that followed Kenji's confession was heavy, but no longer suffocating. It was a silence born of exhaustion, of profound pain, and a raw, nascent honesty. The air in the shack, thick with the scent of desperation, began to feel less oppressive. Hannah sank onto the mat beside him, not out of affection, but from a shared weariness. The anger, though still a ember deep within her, was now tempered by a complex understanding. He was not the malicious deceiver she had sometimes imagined, but a man as much a prisoner of his circumstances as she was. The polished man of the photograph, the embodiment of an idealized future, was utterly gone, replaced by this broken, defeated individual. Yet, in his vulnerability, a new form of truth, albeit a painful one, had emerged. They spent the next few days in a quiet, almost somber truce. There were no grand gestures of reconciliation, no sudden declarations of love. Instead, there was a grim, mutual acceptance of their shared predicament. With the crops ruined, there was no income. They were both trapped, but something had shifted. Kenji, no longer weighed down by the need to maintain a facade, seemed marginally less tense. He spoke a little more, not of dreams, but of practicalities. "We can try another field," he murmured one evening, his voice rough. "Perhaps lettuce, it grows faster." Hannah, in turn, found a new resolve. She was no longer waiting for salvation, no longer clinging to a phantom image. She looked at Kenji, truly looked at him, and saw not the man who had lied, but the man who was now forced to confront his own truth. She saw a partner in survival. They began to work together differently. In the mornings, instead of the silent march to separate rows, they now discussed the day's tasks, a tentative dialogue replacing the grim silence. Hannah, with her sharper observations and growing assertiveness, started offering suggestions, small improvements gleaned from her conversations with other women. "The foreman charges too much for water," she pointed out one day. "Akiko says we can collect rainwater if we line the barrels." Kenji, after an initial flicker of surprise, nodded. "It is worth trying." Their relationship began to evolve, not into the romantic ideal she had once dreamed of, but into a pragmatic, resilient partnership. They were bound not by love, but by necessity, by mutual suffering, and by a growing unspoken respect for each other's endurance. They planted a small vegetable patch near their shack, nurturing the fragile seedlings with meticulous care, a shared act of defiance against the barrenness around them. Hannah, using her limited English and newfound confidence, began to negotiate for slightly better wages for herself and a few other women in the fields. A small, yet significant victory. She found that her own determination, once dormant, blossomed under the harsh sun, proving to be more resilient than any photograph could ever promise. Years blurred into a tapestry of hard work, small triumphs, and enduring challenges. Hana Tanaka, the naive picture bride who had arrived clutching a faded photograph, had transformed into a woman of immense strength and unwavering resolve. Her hands, once soft, were now gnarled and powerful, bearing the marks of countless harvests. Her face, once smooth, was etched with lines, each telling a story of resilience, of battles fought and survived. She was no longer just Kenji's wife. She was a pillar of the growing Japanese community, a quiet leader, a voice for those who struggled. She organized childcare for mothers working in the fields, taught English phrases to new arrivals, and helped mediate disputes among the laborers, her quiet authority earning her the respect of all. Kenji, too, had changed. The grimness that once defined him had softened, replaced by a quiet dignity. The incessant worry never entirely left his eyes, but his shoulders were less hunched, his spirit less broken. He had found his own measure of respect in the community, a steady, reliable presence. He and Hana, though never expressing overt affection, had forged a bond deeper than any fleeting romance. Their love was not the passionate flame of youth, but a slow-burning ember of companionship, mutual respect, and an unbreakable loyalty, tempered in the crucible of shared hardship. They had built a life, not the one she had envisioned in Japan, but a life rooted deeply in the unforgiving American soil, sustained by their combined will and quiet resilience. They had 2 children, a son and a daughter, who knew only this land, their laughter echoing through the small, sturdy house they had eventually managed to build, a testament to their enduring struggle. The photograph of Kenji, the one that had started it all, remained. Hana kept it in a small lacquered box, hidden away amongst other treasured memories. A lock of her son's baby hair, a letter from Fumi. She would sometimes take it out, tracing the lines of his youthful, idealized face. It no longer sparked resentment or pain. Instead, it was a quiet reminder of a journey, a symbol of where she had come from and how far she had traveled. It represented the illusions of youth, the powerful sway of hope, and the harsh realities that had shaped her. The initial amazement she felt at the uncanny likeness had long since dissolved, replaced by a profound understanding of truth, of sacrifice, and of the incredible, indomitable spirit of the picture brides. Looking back, Hana often reflected on the thousands of women like her, who had crossed the vast ocean, armed with little more than a photograph and a desperate dream. They had faced deception, hardship, and immense loneliness. But they had also found strength within themselves, built communities, and against all odds, laid the foundations for future generations. Their journey, born of a cruel illusion, had ultimately blossomed into a powerful testament to human resilience. The man in the photograph had been a lie, but the life she had built with the real man, forged in the fires of adversity, was undeniably, beautifully real. If you found Hana's journey compelling, and the struggles of the picture brides insightful, please consider subscribing to our channel for more stories of resilience and history. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what resonated with you the most.